I'm Jim Critchlow. Today, what I'm going to do is do a brief overview of the life and theology of the prophet Jeremiah. I'm going to give comments and structure to two articles written in the New International Dictionary of the Old Testament, Theology and Exegesis. Now, this is volume 4, pages 752 to 767. The two articles written by Elmer Martins and Dr. J. Gordon McConville. He's my Dr. Fodder. He's the one who approved my dissertation at the University of Edinburgh on the book of Jeremiah. What I'll do is just go briefly through the life of Jeremiah, reading a few extracts from the English Standard Version, and then talk about the theology of the book. Jeremiah, in the Hebrew, Yirmiyahu, was a prophet at the turn of the 6th century BC. His ministry and life are politically intertwined with Babylon's expansion into the area of Israel, and certainly their capture of Jerusalem in 587 BC. His oracles of judgment, but also salvation, are given over a period of 30 to 40 years, recorded in the book of Jeremiah, and by word count, the longest book in the Bible. Now, during the early years of Jeremiah, he was born generally, we believe, in 640 BC during the reign of King Josiah. His family home was at Anathoth. He was probably from a priestly family. As a matter of fact, his father Hilkiah is likely descended from the line of Eli the priest, who was cursed before Samuel's service began as priest and prophet in the book of Samuel. Eventually, Solomon banned the whole family from the priesthood. That's in 1 Kings 26 and 27. In the 13th year of Josiah, sometimes dated 627 or 626 BC, Jeremiah received his call from the Lord. He objected, as most prophets do, to their call, that he was either too young or he was a difficult speaker. But God promised that he would be with Jeremiah and undergird his ministry with God's presence and enablement. A couple of things happened during the ministry of Jeremiah. Certainly the decreasing ability of Assyria, the increasing ability of Babylon, and the decreasing ability of Egypt to enact their fortunes around the world. The great beginning of Josiah's revival or reform began, and certainly Jeremiah was commanded to talk about the reform and the requirement for covenant faithfulness in Israel. God demanded that Jeremiah never marry or have children because God was going to disenfranchise his people. Let me read first from the call of Jeremiah, a very famous verse. Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. And Jeremiah said he just didn't have the right ability or enablement. And the Lord put his hand on Jeremiah's mouth in verse 9. I have put my words in your mouth. I have set you this day over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. And this is certainly the nature of Jeremiah's ministry. There are a number of commentators who will talk about Jeremiah, whether he wrote the entire book or whether it was expanded after his lifetime. There are a number of commentators. If you are doing your exegesis in the book of Jeremiah, you need to be aware of who those individuals are. I do recommend John Bright's commentary and also William Holliday's commentary and the Word Biblical Commentary by Craigie and friends. Now, the career highlights of Jeremiah. The book of Jeremiah does not relate events chronologically. This is one of the frustrations of reading through the book, but it's important that we get the idea that generally the first 25 chapters are in chronological order, but then things rapidly go in different directions. And Jeremiah certainly was a supporter of the ministry of Josiah, King Josiah from 640 to 609 BC, and he announced early during his ministry that the coming foe from the north, and specifically Babylon, was on its way. Early in the reign of King Jehoiakim, 509 to 598, Jeremiah preached the famous temple sermon. I turn to that now and refer to Jeremiah chapter 7, where Jeremiah was commanded to stand in the gate of the Lord's house and proclaim this word. Do not trust in these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. What had happened was the people of Jeremiah's day had completely turned their backs on God, and they were hoping, because they had this beautiful temple that had been built by Solomon, that nothing would happen to them. Nothing, of course, could be further from the truth. Jeremiah predicted the coming of Babylon to deal with the apostasy of the people. In 605 BC, the historic battle between Egypt and Babylon happened in the plains of Carchemish, and the Babylonians defeated the Egyptians, which caused the foe from the north, the Babylonians, unimpeded access to the riches of Egypt, coming straight down through the land of Israel. In Jeremiah chapter 36, Jeremiah is talking about the scroll that he had dictated to his scribe Baruch. Jeremiah at the time was confined, could not go into the temple area, and so he sent Baruch, who read the scroll from Jeremiah. It was eventually burned in a fire pot by King Jehoiakim. That scroll was redictated, and all the events and prophecies that had been burned by Jehoiakim are put back into writing, but that causes some of the disruption, undoubtedly, in the task of writing the prophecies down. Jeremiah counseled Zedekiah to give up to Babylon, and Zedekiah refused. Jeremiah was an eyewitness to the destruction of Jerusalem. He was abducted by the faithless residents and taken to Egypt, where presumably he was stoned, according to tradition, by those who had taken him captive. The situation, the theology of the book, this long ministry of Jeremiah, extending it certainly from the call in 626 BC to the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, and finally to Jeremiah's death in Egypt, it's a long period of time. Judah was the last of the great kingdom of King David, and Jeremiah talks to all of the people and complains about their covenant unfaithfulness. As I have divided the book here, same as Professor McConville, I call Jeremiah 1, the opening of the book, the call narrative. Chapters 2 through 6 are the early oracles. Chapter 7, which begins the famous temple sermon, through chapter 20, 7 through 20, this transition to inevitable judgment. Chapters 21 to 24, of which in our course, OT 750, we're particularly interested. Then Jeremiah 25 to 36, the exile is inevitable. And 37 to 45, the fall of Judah and Jerusalem. 46 to 51, the oracles against the nations. And finally, Jeremiah 52, the postscript and the king's coda about Jehoiakim being released. Throughout the book, there is a reeve, the Resh Yod Beit, the prophetic call for, it's an accusation about the people, about their faithlessness to the Lord's covenant. There is the book of covenant, or the book of consolation, in Jeremiah 31 to 33. Those chapters spark a new hope in the life of Jeremiah and show some of the surprising reversals. In one hopeful account in Jeremiah 38, 6 and 7, Jeremiah is set free from a cistern by Ebed-Melech. The final word in Jeremiah is the release of King Jehoiakim from captivity. The themes of the book are very interesting. Certainly the covenant, the role of the prophet, and the announcement of a Messiah and a new covenant. The canonical significance: Jeremiah is the prophet that weeps, but he also forecasts the incoming breaking in of God's amazing grace. I do recommend the commentaries by Craigie, Kelly, and Drinkard, that's Jeremiah. Also, William Holliday, Jeremiah 1 and Jeremiah 2. The commentaries by Jones and Bright. The work done by John Goldengay and Gerald Jansen, and of course, Professor McConville. If you have any questions, by all means, see me in class.